Hey everybody, this is Perch. Short and simple email here, but it goes into a bigger question. It says, "Hey Perch, I don't know if you've noticed, but a number of comic news sites and review sites and comic channels have been shutting down recently. You also have places like The Beat asking for donations in order to stay afloat. I believe Bleeding Cool has done that. It has done that as well. What is your take on this? Why are so many comic news, comic journalism, and comic fan sites calling it quits? Namely, what's different in 2024 that wasn't true in 2019 when a lot of these sites were going strong? I know a lot of comic channels like to say that the comics business collapsed in 2016, but the reality is lots of those sites were doing just fine for a good 6 to 7 years after that date. So what do you think is the real culprit? Curious to your answer. Thank you for your show. I always enjoy it. Okay, all good. All right. So a lot of you probably have opinions on this topic, and start typing them in the comments now. Why wait for my dumbass opinion? You can go ahead and get that going. But to me, I'm going to use an analogy to another item of pop culture that I probably use too often, and that's wrestling. So if I can take your attention back to the amazing world of 1994 to about 1998, and you had the Monday Night Wars, and you had the Attitude Era, and you had the NWO, and you had all that kind of stuff. One thing you also had was a ton of wrestling news sites and wrestling fan sites, and just wrestling was big business. And you had newsletters, and you had all kinds of stuff going on. Podcast. I mean, you had a lot of very early stage items that many other pop culture things wouldn't get for many years later. There were broadcast shows. There was like internet radio shows before there was YouTube or podcasts, and this is a big deal in the world of wrestling, and there was a lot of money to be made. There were Dave Meltzer from what was his deal? Pro Wrestling Observer, was that his thing? Anyway, I mean, these guys were pulling in good money, like legit, really good money as wrestling news journalists, and you saw these sites pop up that had decent ad revenue and had subscribers. And it is very quaint to think about the 90s when a lot of these guys were going really strong. You had just a ton of wrestling attention, and this carried on into the 2000s. But as the WWE bought the WCW, and a lot of these Monday Night Wars came to an end, so too came to an end a lot of the attention and the revenue and the push. And so what you found was just this slow kind of dissolving of that business. And I think there's a huge parallel to comics right now. What's important to note about pro wrestling, so you use the example of 2016. I'm not one of those people, for what it's worth, that believes that 2016 was the be-all, end-all death of all comics, and that's when, things went to shit. Because there are a lot, in both directions, I think that's a misnomer. In 2008, 2010, you were seeing what would become the rise and abuse of events and gimmicks. And you would see kind of the, and this has been going on since the late 90s, the downplaying of the artist in favor of the writer. And you saw a bunch of different things going on in comics that dates back further. I think people get kind of confused by the Marvel Knights and Joe Quesada coming into Marvel and kind of some of that era in the early 2000s. And they forget the fact that you had a complete crash and collapse in the late 90s. And you had that era was not the golden time of comics. There was a lot of really, forgettable comics during that era. It's just, we don't talk about them because they were forgettable and people forgot them. But you had and you had the New 52, and you had a bunch of these kind of things that I would call artificial boosts to comics, even though the poison was already in there in terms of what was going to hurt the industry. Things like an over-reliance on variants, things like an over-reliance on events, things like propping up a comic by relaunching it. stuff that, was keeping money coming into comics, but were not an indicator of healthy comics. And this, I think, dated back, like I said, to 2010, maybe earlier. And that to me was that was a canary in the coal mine. And what happened was, nothing changes fast. I got into huge arguments with probably some of you who are no longer, watching this show. But when COVID hit, I was getting it from both sides, which is something Riley Reid normally says. But I said, DC Comics is not going to die. And there was a YouTube contingent that said DC Comics is going to die this summer. I have an inside source saying they're going to die this summer. And then the complete opposite of that contingent, the complete opposite group, were also calling for DC's demise for a completely different reason. And that was the DC went to Tuesday instead of Wednesday, and they kind of thumbed their nose at Diamond. And so you had two as different as they get groups, both claiming that within months, the entire comic business was about to collapse in a, raining tower of fiery shit. And that obviously didn't happen because it's, 2024 now, and it's been several years, and DC's still cranking out comics. But the biggest reason why that was a very safe prediction is not because I was being paid by DC or because I was secretly hoping that DC Comics would continue on forever in infinity, but because things don't die that fast. And I mean, you've heard me say it on this channel, but this is the ounce of common sense that I think all of us should try and get to, which is, comics don't just collapse in a month. That's not how it works. I think we've been kind of tricked and deluded into thinking that, a lot of things can happen. But I'll give you a different example. You know that store, Bed Bath & Beyond? That store has been on death life support for a decade. You may have had an amazing one next to you that was just the most popular store in your entire neighborhood, but for the vast majority of the country, Bed Bath & Beyond was in deep shit. And so in 2023, when, one of the executives of that company jumped out of a window and suddenly they're declaring bankruptcy and stores are closing, it felt dramatic for people. I had people telling me when we were talking about the comics, well, it's like, well, look at Bed Bath & Beyond. They were healthy and then suddenly they weren't. And the answer was they were not healthy. They were not suddenly healthy and then suddenly dead. Things take time. And so if you're looking for the death of comics, it's going to be, first of all, it's going to be much slower than you think. And you should be looking for different indicators like can't pay their bills. That's a good one. Or, a vast majority of creators are not getting paid. Or, sudden and weird changes to the shipping schedule. I mean, just things that are more, random and dramatic and have an indication of a company, having a fire sale. You remember when Zaslav took over, and then there were all these, YouTube shows saying like Zaslav walked into DC's offices and asked to see their books and is pissed and is going to fire everybody. Yeah, God, I wish that was how it worked. I really do. Like I've worked with a number of executives at a number of different companies. I wish they would take action like that, but they don't. It would be what a magical world we would live in, and I mean it. But the reason why you've got all these news channels and websites and fan sites and everything that are starting to shutter is that the end has not the end, but the end of the gravy train has hit. Which doesn't mean the death of comics. I mean, using the wrestling example, wrestling is still going. Wrestling has actually had a bit of a resurgence lately. So more people are in there. But the easy money from it is not. You can't, put up a website, call yourself Pro Wrestling News, and make great money anymore. The ad revenues are not there. The attention and the pop culture isn't there. Now, maybe the hardcore fans are buying tickets. WrestleMania can sell out. But that doesn't mean that the supporting businesses around it, that the ecosystem is healthy, because it is not. So you take a look at comics, and the answer is, for a while, and particularly, you had the big events, and you had a lot of attention and crossovers, and you had the Marvel, comic movies come up and everything else. But when COVID hit and the movies struggled, which they did, again, maybe you could say all you want that it was because the movie sucked, and I would probably agree with you because a lot of the more recent movies did suck. But COVID was a combination of two things. COVID, and for a lot of people, Avengers Endgame was the jumping off point. It was a great conclusion. They buried Tony Stark. He was in the very first one with Iron Man. People were good. They're like, you know what? I've watched 30 of these. I'm done. I feel good about my choice of calling it a day. And and then followed up quickly by COVID, and people can't go to theaters, and just everything is kind of goofy. And we had a lull in stuff on Disney Plus, and I mean, like, and you know, and now you're down into the B and the C characters, and just like a number of factors means the attention kind of dissipated from Marvel Comics, and DC never got there for the movies. And then on top of that, a lot of these sites that were making not amazing money, but decent money from ad revenue are suddenly getting half as much money or less. And, you know, you could tell, like, at some point, too, a lot of the clickbait articles, a lot of the things that you used to get cheap revenue for, like, you know, top 10 X-Men who wore leather jackets, a list, you know, like stuff like that. It's just, you know, you've done all those articles. What's left? And it didn't help that several of these sites went down then the path of, like, characters we wish were gay. And it's like, all right, whether you're, you know, pro LGBTQ or anti-LGBTQ or just wants good comics and don't really care one way or another, if you're getting a comic article about, you know, which characters are, you know, do you wish were secretly gay, you've run the gamut of what anyone gives a shit about. It would be equivalent to saying, you know, here's a top 10 article of Justice League members who should have red hair. Like, nobody cares. At that point, nobody really cares. And so that's, in effect, where we're at with comics. So that's why these sites are shutting down. The money isn't there. The easy money, easy articles, you know, shooting fish from a barrel stuff isn't there. And no matter how, you know, whatever side of the culture war you're on, it is hard to get excited and horny about, you know, Black Panther's 6th relaunch in 6 years. It's just tough. You know, there's rumors that as part of the X-Men lineup, we're going to get a solo Storm book and a solo Dazzler book. That's Dazzler. And I have a hard time believing, you know what, that's bullshit. I don't believe that one's true. But Storm, sure. Yeah, of course they're going to try a solo Storm book. But what do you write about it? Like, if you're a news site or a fan site, like, finally, Storm's getting a comic. All right. Then what? Here's top 10 villains that don't like Storm. Number 1, Shadow King. Number 2, Apocalypse? I don't know. Was he just a good guy? I don't know. Number 3, one of those Araku dudes. Number 4, Tight Spaces. Number 5, I mean, like, dude, what? You just, there's not much you could do with it anymore. And so, you know, with it being very hard to write content of any meaning, very few people care. The ad revenue has gone out of it. These sites are dying. And they're going to die across the board. It's not just the culture war sites are also dying because you just, I mean, like, you can't, and there will be, the guaranteed there'll be somebody like, I don't know, this channel's going strong. Okay. But there's a reason why a lot of the sites that started out as anti-comics are now having to get into, like, hey, Amber Heard's still a bitch. Or, you know, did you see that, you know, Disney's got a cartoon and one of the mice is gay? Like, there's a reason why you're having, and that's, by the way, no knock against anybody. It's not a secret shot against anyone. It's just, there's just not enough goddamn comic content out there, whether you're pro or con, to do anything with anymore. And so that's where we sit. Anyway, what's your theory? Why do you think these sites are closing down? Feel free. Speculate at length in the comments below, and thanks for listening.